This is a copy of the sermon that will be preached at North Shields Evangelical Church on Sunday the 26th of January. It's based on Mark chapter 2 verse 18 to chapter 3 verse 6. There's a link below the video to those verses, and it's really important you read them before listening. Going to look at three things: the rules that raise us, the rules that control us, and the ruler who raises us and frees us. I don't know if you've ever seen a vehicle with a "How's my driving" bumper sticker. Companies often put a "How's my driving" sticker on the back of their lorries or vans. They contain a number so that you can phone up and comment if you see their drivers keeping the rules or breaking them, being good drivers or bad. Someone might phone up and say, "The van with this number plate parked over my driveway," or "I saw this driver speeding on the motorway," or "They may have delivered my shopping, but he knocked the head off my garden gnome." People phone up to say if they see the driver breaking the rules or being a bad driver. But do you think anyone ever phones up to do the opposite? "I saw the van with this number plate keep to the speed limit, indicating good time, and deliberately avoid squashing 5 hedgehogs," or "The way that van did that 3-point turn, it was more beautiful than Torville and Dean." Technically, we have the option to phone up to attack or defend the driver, to tear them down or build them up. But which do you find yourself doing the most in life? Celebrating, congratulating, and encouraging other people? Or complaining, criticizing, and condemning? In these verses, we hear about 3 examples of people phoning up to comment on the behaviour of Jesus and his followers. How religious are Jesus and his disciples? Well, the people comment on how Jesus' followers didn't fast. Fasting was seen as a sign of being a good religious person. Then the Pharisees criticised Jesus for his followers breaking the Sabbath. The Jews had rules that said on the Sabbath no work was allowed. Then the rule keepers were looking to spot Jesus as breaking the rules and condemn him for doing it. They are keen to tear Jesus down, literally wanting to destroy him. They seem to enjoy complaining, criticising, and condemning. But they could have chosen to do the opposite. God's Old Testament rules about the Sabbath said this: "If you enter your neighbour's grain field, you may pick kernels with your hands, but you must not put a sickle to their standing grain." On a Sabbath, God allowed people to pick grain to satisfy their hunger, but you could not harvest the grain or work on it in the fields as part of a job. Biblically, the Pharisees could have rushed to defend the disciples. They were picking grain, not cutting it down. But instead, they were quick to judge. When Jesus healed a man on the Sabbath, the Pharisees could have celebrated the fact that Jesus used that day to do a good thing. But the Pharisees, they were a lot like us. They were more eager to point out faults. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But why? Why did the Pharisees love tearing down others? Why are we also so quick to point the finger at those who break the rules? I think it's because those who are raised by rules are raised by rules. We are all raised by rules. We are all taught rules as we grow up. As a child, you might have been taught certain rules about food. You must eat your main course if you want a pudding. No elbows on tables. In this family, we only eat chocolate on a Sunday. At church, you might have been taught the QRST rules about what supposedly makes a good Christian. Q, quiet time. Good Christians pray and read the Bible every day. R, rota. Good Christians have their names on a church rota. S, Sunday. If there's a meeting on a Sunday, the best Christians attend them all. T, tithing. Everyone must give 10% of their income to the church. You might have your own set of rules that you try and keep. No more than 1 hour of TV a day, or no complaining, ever. These may be good rules to have. But beware. Those who are raised by rules are raised by rules. Those who grow up on certain rules often rank themselves highly because they obey them, but look down on those who don't. The Pharisees used rules to raise themselves up and tear others down. They thought of themselves as good religious Jews because they kept the rules. They used rules to raise their reputation and raise their ego. They enjoyed pointing out those bad people who did not obey the rules. They tore down others in order to build up themselves. They were like people who choose option B to make themselves a better driver. Option A, to become a better driver, attend a 10-week advanced driving course. Option B, instantly become a better driver in your head by spending 10 minutes in the back of a taxi, pointing out every error that they make. Our estimation of ourselves instantly goes up every time we find a reason to criticize someone else. Watch out, your rules will likely cause you to do the same. As soon as you see someone eating with their elbows on the table, blasphemy, such terrible parents. You might evaluate how good a Christian someone else is by QRST standards. Do they have a quiet time? Are they on a rota? Do they attend every meeting? How much of their income do they give away? If you do these things, you might be full of pride. Or you might consider yourself a bad Christian if you don't. If one of the rules you have is, I never complain. If you live by the rule, I never complain, chances are you'll look down on those who moan and groan their way through a common cold. And you'll congratulate yourself for not attending A&E till 3 weeks after you chopped off your finger. Proud that your whole arm is now infected. The rules you've been raised up on will impact how you rank yourself and rank others. We consider ourselves good people when we keep our rules. We tear down rule breakers in order to build up ourselves. And this sad reality can cause us to have the same attitude toward Jesus as these Pharisees. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. The literal translation of the word kill is destroy. This verse is shocking. They want to destroy Jesus. What? Jesus? Jesus had just raised a leper's sense of self-worth, welcoming back into society. Jesus had just healed a paralyzed man, raising him to his feet. Jesus had just elevated the lowest of the low, tax collectors, sinners. Jesus had just elevated them by inviting them to get to know God. And yet the Pharisees' response to Jesus' fourth act of kindness is to want to destroy him. But why? Why might the act of Jesus raising these people turn us against him? Well, imagine 3 Olympic sprinters win gold, silver and bronze. How would they react if the sprinter who came fourth was stood on the highest part of the podium and awarded the winner's crown? How would a mother feel if she brought up her son to be kind and well behaved, but people gave all the credit to his absent father? Would Ronaldo like it if he scored a hat-trick for Portugal, but all of Monday's headlines were about the players that passed him the ball? The rule is that the fastest sprinter gets the gold medal. The hard-working parent gets the credit. The one who scores the goals is the best player on the pitch. Those are our rules. If we live by these rules, we will react against everyone and everything that goes against them. So why did the Pharisees turn against Jesus? Because they live by the rule that obeying the rules is what makes you right with God. They live by the rule that God's favour is reserved for those who deserve it. And because they were the best at keeping these religious rules, they wanted to destroy Jesus. But Jesus forgave sinners. Jesus welcomed the undeserving. Jesus raised those who asked, even if they did not deserve it. So beware. Beware that your rules don't lead you to turn your back on Jesus, God's Son. God does not raise those who are raised on rules and who obey them. God raises those who admit they need Jesus just as much as everyone else. But you might say to yourself, I'm no Pharisee. I don't want to destroy Jesus. I love Jesus. That's really good. Let me ask you this. Do you want to love him more? Understand this. You'll never love Jesus more when Jesus is only half your saviour. If you think of yourself as half as sinful as other people, if you spend half your time admiring your own goodness, if half your focus in life is taken up pointing out the sins of others, if you only picture Jesus as half your saviour, though you may not want to destroy Jesus, you'll never appreciate the fullness of his grace and his love. Rules. Rules can raise us, and rules, they can control us as well. If you were to write a list of things that can most destroy a person, what would you rank near the top? Injecting heroin, gambling, compulsive buying, pack-a-day smoking, snorting cocaine. These can all destroy a person mentally, physically, financially. But where would you place rule keeping? Towards the bottom of the list or towards the top? Surely rule keeping only increases our discipline, makes us better people, and makes us more religious. Yes, addictions destroy people, not rules. I thought this until I remembered one definition of addiction. Addiction is when someone continues a pattern of behaviour despite the harm to themselves and the harm to others. They cannot bring themselves to stop because they are under the control of something else. The Pharisees found themselves under the control of their rules. Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was meant to serve man's needs, helping people to rest and spend time reflecting on God's goodness. But the Pharisees served the Sabbath. They let the rule control their reasoning and behaviour, even to their harm. If they were hungry on the Sabbath, they'd rather starve than pick a mouthful of grain in the fields. If they saw someone sick on the Sabbath, they'd rather that they spend an extra day in pain than be healed. If their parents were in financial need, they couldn't bring themselves to help, for they must first obey their rule about how much money they'd give to religious purposes. So the Pharisees desperately needed Jesus. As a rule, they didn't admit weakness or confess being in need. It is a dangerous thing when someone continues in a pattern of behaviour, despite the harm to themselves and the harm to others. It is a dangerous thing when some man-made rule has control over us to that degree. Say a church lives by the rule that they always have an evening service. This rule raises them. It makes them feel superior to other churches that just have one service on a Sunday. But the 5 8-year-old members destroy themselves trying to awake after 6 p.m. at night. And the pastor is drained by having to prepare 2 lots of everything every week. But because they believe faithful churches have 2 services every week, they continue to wear themselves out. Then there's Stephanie. Stephanie lives by the rule that she never complains. Her pride levels rise every time she overhears somebody say, "That's Stephanie. She never complains." But last week she had a miscarriage, and her husband ignored her pain. She's broken and desperately needs to vent her feelings. And yet she leaves church with a smile on her face after saying nothing. She'd rather suffer in silence than lose the badge of pride. That's Stephanie. She never complains. Or David is a QRST Christian. He's been taught that good Christians always have a quiet time, are on lots of church rotas, attend every service on a Sunday, tithe 10% of their income. All these things have the potential to do David a great deal of good, helping him become more disciplined, set godly priorities, and grow in faith. But instead of these rules serving David, these rules control him. David's relationship with God is dictated by the success of his quiet time. He feels God must be smiling at him when he prays for over an hour, but he feels instantly unworthy when he only manages 5 minutes. David works 5 days of the week, but because all good Christians are supposedly on a rota, he signed up to lead church every fortnight and help out at Sunday school every other week. His relationship with his 5 kids is destroyed by his tithing. He explains to them that they cannot afford any Saturday day trips out, because all their spare cash goes on financing the church roof. Instead of these rules serving David and helping him, these rules control him to his own harm. Do you have any rules that you make for yourself? Does your church have any unwritten rules that you must obey? Maybe think about these 2 questions this coming week. These rules can be a good thing if they serve a purpose. But rules can be a bad thing when we serve them to our own harm, losing the ability to think rationally and biblically about them, because the rule controls us. Thankfully, Jesus offers you and I an option B. The ruler who raises and frees us. There are typically 2 ways to meet a ruler. If you want to meet the ruler of a country, you need to earn a title, such as an MBE, or work your way up through the ranks of government or the army, or pay a vast amount of money to attend the Royal Variety performance, then look through your binoculars at King Charles sat up in his royal box. The other way to meet a ruler is to stand outside the Kremlin and shout something about President Putin's bald patch. Sometimes we think God, the ruler of all things, is the same. To meet with God is a long process. You've got to earn your way into his good books, pray for an hour before he really listens, be on a run of good behaviour, obeying the rules. To receive God's favour is a long process, but displease him and he'll instantly come down on you in wrath. Thankfully, Jesus flipped these ideas on their heads. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Jesus came to free people from the man-made rules about how we might know God's favour. Jesus can free you and I, because he carried this load himself. As someone wiser than me once said, Jesus lived the life that you should have lived, and died the death you should have died. Jesus lived a life of perfect obedience to God and died for every time you and I disobey him. So let him now speak these words to you. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened by all of these rules, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls.